I never expected to be left behind like an old piece of luggage that nobody wanted to carry anymore. But that Thanksgiving evening, sitting in the cold darkness of my own driveway in that blue Cadillac, with the keys firmly in my pocket and the remote control dead in my hands, something shifted inside me. Something that had been dormant for far too long finally woke up. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. I've spent the better part of the last decade bending over backwards for my family, stretching myself thin like taffy, compromising my own needs until I barely recognized myself in the mirror anymore. But that night, left alone in a car while everyone else walked toward the warm glow of the Johnson family's mansion on Elm Street, I decided something was going to change. The keys in my pocket weren't just about a car anymore. They were about power, about choice, about reclaiming my life from people who'd taken it for granted for far too long. Looking back now, I can trace the exact moment when my family started treating me like I was invisible, like I was some kind of liability they'd inherited rather than a mother and grandmother they actually loved. It didn't happen overnight. These things never do. They happen gradually, like a slow fade in an old photograph, where you don't notice the image disappearing until one day you can barely make out what was once crystal clear. My daughter Susan had always been my favorite, though I shouldn't admit that out loud. Susan was the brilliant one, the lawyer, the ambitious one, the daughter who'd made something of herself. She married well too, to Derek, a man who wore expensive suits and said things like fiscal responsibility and asset optimization at dinner parties. They had 2 children, Emma and Jordan, who were 17 and 15 respectively, and they lived in that perfect house with the perfect landscaping in the perfect neighborhood. My son Thomas, the younger one, had never quite found his footing. He worked in retail management, lived about 40 minutes away with his wife Carla, and they had one daughter, Melody, who was 12. Thomas had always been the sensitive one, the one who actually asked how I was doing when he called, the one who remembered my birthday without his wife having to remind him. But Thomas's life was smaller, humbler, less impressive in the eyes of people like Derek. And so gradually, almost imperceptibly, Thomas and his family became the secondary branch of our family tree. The ones we saw occasionally. The ones we remembered when it was convenient. Over the past decade, I'd watched my role transform from mother to helper. When did that happen exactly? I couldn't pinpoint the moment, but I could certainly document the evidence. I'd helped Susan pay for her kids' private school, $20,000 that I didn't really have but that I scraped together because she said it was an investment in their futures. I'd helped them with their mortgage when Derek's business took a downturn one year, writing a check for $15,000 that I'd been saving for my own retirement. I'd paid for their family vacations dozens of times, always insisting I didn't mind, always minimizing it, always making excuses about how I had plenty of money, when the truth was my Social Security and modest savings were being slowly drained away by my own generosity. And the physical help, Lord, the physical help. I was constantly driving to their house to babysit, to clean their kitchen, to organize their closets, to do the things that their increasingly busy lives didn't allow time for. I became their free maid, their unpaid therapist, their round-the-clock emotional support system. When Emma had drama with her best friends in 11th grade, I was there for hours listening, validating, offering advice. When Susan was stressed about a big case at her law firm, I'd come over and cook elaborate meals for them, preparing enough food to last several days so they wouldn't have to worry about something as trivial as eating. When Derek complained about the state of the garden, I spent entire weekends out there in the sun with my aching knees, weeding and pruning and planting until it looked like something out of a magazine spread. Thomas and his family seemed to understand my energy in a way that Susan's family never did. They'd always insist that I not go to too much trouble, that they appreciated me being there but didn't expect me to run myself ragged. They'd actually ask me about my own life, my own interests, my own struggles. But Thomas's invitations came less and less frequently because honestly, I was so busy shuttling to Susan's house, handling Susan's needs, managing Susan's expectations, that I barely had time to see my younger son. And when I did see Thomas, I was already depleted, already tired, already scattered. My ex-husband Robert passed away 6 years ago. We'd been divorced for 18 years before that. A clean separation, friendly enough, though we drifted into completely separate lives. He left me a modest estate, about $80,000, which seemed like a lot at the time but which seemed to evaporate startlingly quickly once the medical bills and funeral expenses were paid. Robert had loved both our children equally, I think, though he'd also been somewhat distant from both of them. He'd paid his child support faithfully until both kids turned 18, and he'd paid for college, which I'd been grateful for. But he'd never been the kind of father who threw himself into their lives with wild abandon. After the divorce, he'd built a new life with a new wife, Eleanor, and they'd moved to Colorado. He'd see the kids once or twice a year, usually around Christmas. When he died, Eleanor was very gracious about the funeral arrangements and logistics. She even came back for the service, which I thought was kind. Robert's death had been the inflection point where I'd really thrown myself into being the present parent, the involved grandparent, the emotional anchor for everyone. I'd adopted this role as though it was my new purpose in life, as though being needed by them was the same thing as being loved by them. I'd been so eager to demonstrate my loyalty, my commitment, my irreplaceability in their lives that I'd essentially volunteered for a life of servitude, without even realizing I was doing it. Which brings me to that specific Thanksgiving. My family had a tradition, at least that's what I'd thought it was. Every Thanksgiving, we'd all gather at Susan and Derek's house. My sister Patricia would come too, with her husband Bill, and eventually my niece Linda, who lived just 30 minutes away. We'd spend the whole day together, cooking, laughing, sharing stories, watching football in the living room, playing card games. It was something I genuinely loved, something that made me feel connected to my family, in a way that the constant helping and supporting throughout the year didn't quite manage. On Thanksgiving, we were all equals, all just sitting around together, celebrating gratitude and family and togetherness. This particular year, I'd been planning my contribution to the meal for weeks. I was making my famous pecan pie, the one my children had grown up with, the one they always specifically requested. I was also making 3 different side dishes, 2 kinds of bread, and my homemade cranberry sauce. Susan had asked me to bring whatever you want, because she'd said she knew my contributions would be delicious and she loved my cooking. So I'd spent the whole day before Thanksgiving preparing everything. I'd started at 6 in the morning and didn't stop until nearly midnight. My feet were killing me, my back was aching, but I was filled with this sense of purpose and love. These dishes represented hours of my time, my effort, my care. I was literally putting love into food and bringing it to my family's table. The morning of Thanksgiving, I packed everything carefully into containers, loaded it into my blue Cadillac, the car my husband Robert had bought me 15 years ago, and which I was incredibly proud of, and drove to Susan's house. It was about a 20-minute drive from my little cottage on the edge of town. As I pulled into their circular driveway, I could see the house already bustling with activity. Derek was hanging cornucopias on the front door. Through the windows, I could see Susan moving around in the kitchen. Emma and Jordan were somewhere inside too, probably getting ready. I'd arrived at 10 in the morning. The dinner wasn't until 3. I knew this because Susan had mentioned it multiple times. Make sure you're here by 10 so we can get everything prepared. You know how elaborate this meal is. So I was early, which was typical of me. I'm naturally an early person anyway, and when it comes to family events, I like to be there to help with the setup. I unloaded the containers from my car and walked toward the house. Derek saw me coming and called out from the front door. "Margaret, you're here. Wonderful. Susan's in the kitchen." There was something different about the tone of his voice, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Later, I'd realize it was the voice someone uses when they're already starting to make excuses in their mind for something they haven't done yet. I went into the house and found Susan in the kitchen, already stirring a large pot of something. "Margaret," she said, and she came over and hugged me. "You're such a lifesaver. I was worried we wouldn't have enough food, and you know how important it is to have lots of options." "Of course," I said. "You know I love doing this. Where should I put these?" Susan gestured vaguely toward the counter. "Just set them anywhere. We'll figure it out later." I started arranging my dishes on the counter, making room between the items she'd already prepared. I'd brought enough food for at least 15 people, even though I knew there would only be about 10 of us. I believe in abundance when it comes to family celebrations. Susan was stressed. I could tell by the way she was moving around the kitchen, her jaw set, her movements sharp and efficient. "Big case at work?" I asked gently. "Actually, it's nothing work-related," she said. "Derek and I were discussing something last night, and I guess I'm just thinking about it. Do you want to talk about it?" I offered, already knowing I'd clear my whole day if she needed to talk about something. Not right now, she said quickly. Let's just focus on making this Thanksgiving special. Speaking of which, I need to tell you something. My stomach dropped just a tiny bit at those words. What's that? I asked, keeping my voice light. We're going to do things a little differently this year, Susan said. She was focusing very intently on the pot she was stirring. Derek made a reservation at the Johnsons for 3 o'clock. You know, the fancy restaurant on Elm Street? He really wanted to do something special this year. And they have this beautiful private dining room. And Derek convinced me it would be nice to have someone else do all the cooking and cleaning for once. I felt something crystallize in my chest. Oh, I said. So we're not eating here? No, we're going to the Johnsons, she confirmed. Derek made the reservation months ago, actually. He was keeping it as a surprise, but he wanted to spoil me this year. He said with how stressed I've been about work, I deserve to have a nice Thanksgiving where I'm not running around in a kitchen all day. I looked down at the containers of food I'd spent 14 hours preparing. I see, I said quietly. When were you planning to tell me about this? I mentioned it to you a couple of weeks ago, Susan said, and I knew immediately that she hadn't. I would have remembered that conversation. Anyway, it's going to be wonderful. Much more elegant than cooking here. What about all this food? I asked, gesturing to my dishes and hers. Oh, we can freeze some of it, Susan said casually. Or donate it. I don't know. The point is, the focus is going to be on enjoying time together, not on the preparation. Derek really thought this through. He even made a reservation for Thomas and his family too. 2 tables reserved under his name so we'd be split slightly, but all together in the private dining room. I should have realized in that moment that this was coming. I should have seen the signs. But I was so shocked, so caught off guard, that I couldn't quite process what she was telling me. Did Thomas know about this? I asked. Derek called him last week and told him about it, Susan said. Thomas said Carla was really excited about going to the Johnsons. Apparently, they don't get to go to nice restaurants very often. The thing that struck me most about that comment was how casually Susan said it, as though Thomas and his family's financial situation was something slightly embarrassing, something that made them less sophisticated than Susan's family. And the fact that Derek had called to invite them, rather than Susan calling her own brother. It all added up to a story I didn't want to read, but I was reading it anyway. So what time should I come? I asked, trying to focus on the logistics. 3 o'clock, Susan said. Just meet us there. Derek made a reservation for 10 people. So we'll all be in this beautiful private room. Actually, he got us wine pairings too. It's going to be really nice. 3 o'clock. The same time the dinner would have started in her house. The only thing that had changed was the location and the fact that I wouldn't be the one doing the cooking or the preparation. Okay, I said. I'll be there at 3. But then something occurred to me. What should I do with all this food? I asked, gesturing around the kitchen. Susan paused. Well, we could freeze it. Or I could take it home, I suggested. Use it throughout the week. I've got the containers. Sure, Susan said. That's fine too. Whatever works. She didn't say it would be great to have home-cooked food throughout the week. She didn't thank me profusely for spending my entire day preparing meals that she'd just chosen not to use. She just said whatever works, as though it was completely fine to have wasted an entire day of my life. I repacked most of my food into my car. I left the pecan pie and the cranberry sauce with Susan. I figured they could at least have that, but the rest of it I loaded back into the Cadillac. My hands were shaking a little bit, though I wasn't sure if it was from anger or disappointment or just the general feeling of being discarded. By the time I finished repacking the car, it was only about 11 in the morning. The dinner wasn't until 3. I had 4 hours to kill before I needed to get ready and drive to the Johnsons. What are you going to do until 3? Susan asked as I came back inside, trying to sound casual and friendly despite the strange feeling that was settling into my bones. I'm not sure, I said. I thought I'd help you with the preparations, but I guess that's not necessary anymore. Well, you could stay here if you want, Susan offered. Keep me company? It sounded more like she was trying to be nice than like she actually wanted me there. And honestly, the thought of sitting around in her perfectly decorated house, making small talk, pretending this didn't feel like a rejection, felt unbearable. Actually, I think I'll go home for a while, I said. I'll need to freshen up before dinner anyway. Should I bring anything to the restaurant? Wine or anything? No, Derek's got everything arranged, Susan said. Just show up at 3 and enjoy yourself. So I left. I drove back to my little cottage, my car full of home-cooked food that nobody wanted, and I tried not to think about how humiliated I felt, how disposable I'd been made to feel in the space of about 15 minutes. I was 73 years old. I'd spent my entire life putting other people first, sacrificing my own needs, my own dreams, my own financial security for my children. And here I was, being told that my contributions, my cooking, my time, my presence were actually more of a burden than a blessing. Not in those words, of course. In much softer words that were infinitely more painful because they required me to read between the lines and draw my own conclusions. At 2:30 I got ready. I put on a nice dress, the navy blue one with the subtle gold threading that I'd bought specifically for occasions like this. I did my hair, which I'd had highlighted professionally just the week before. I put on my good jewelry, the pearls my mother had left me, the sapphire ring Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary before we divorced. I looked at myself in the mirror and I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. When had I become so sad? When had my eyes lost their sparkle? I drove to the Johnsons' restaurant. It was indeed very fancy, expensive, refined, the kind of place Derek would choose to prove a point about his sophistication and success. I pulled into the parking lot at 2:50 and sat in my car for a moment, breathing, trying to find my composure. That's when everything changed. I was sitting there idling when I noticed something odd. The parking lot appeared mostly empty. There were a few other cars scattered throughout, but it wasn't crowded. It was Thursday afternoon before a holiday dinner, so maybe that made sense. Most people were eating at home like we were supposed to be doing. But then I checked my phone. It was 2:50 and I had no text messages. No call from Susan saying they were running late or telling me which entrance to use. That was unlike her. Susan was always very organized about these sorts of details. She'd usually send a text beforehand with information about parking, where to meet, what to do when I arrived. I decided to go inside and look for them. I walked through the heavy wooden doors of the Johnsons, all dark wood and white tablecloths and the kind of quiet elegance that made you want to speak in a whisper. A host greeted me almost immediately. "Hi, I'm here for the private dining reservation," I said. "It should be under Derek Thompson." The host consulted his computer and frowned slightly. "Ah yes, the Thompson party. Let me just check." He clicked something on his computer. "I'm showing the reservation was actually cancelled on Tuesday. Is there a problem?" The world seemed to tilt just slightly. "Cancelled?" I repeated. "Are you sure?" "Yes, the reservation for tonight was cancelled at 2 p.m. on Tuesday. It shows here that Derek Thompson called in and cancelled. I'm sorry, but there's no record of a reservation for this evening." I felt something collapse inside me. I stood very still, trying to process what I was hearing. Susan had told me this morning that the reservation was at 3 o'clock. She'd been very specific about it. Derek had supposedly made this fancy reservation months ago, but the reservation had been cancelled on Tuesday. That meant Susan had known. That meant she'd gone to my house, looked me in the eye, and lied to me. "Thank you," I said to the host numbly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I walked back out to my car in a daze. I sat down in the driver's seat, and I just stared out the windshield at the empty parking lot. My phone suddenly buzzed with a text message. It was from Susan. "Hey Mom, we decided to do something different tonight. Derek got us tickets to a concert instead. We're heading there now with the kids. You should go home and relax. We'll catch up soon." I stared at that message for what felt like an eternity. The concert. They were going to a concert instead of Thanksgiving dinner. They hadn't told me that. They'd specifically lied to me about where they were going and what they were doing. I called Susan's number and it went straight to voicemail. I called Derek, it also went to voicemail. I sat there in my parked car at the fancy restaurant where nobody was expecting me, where nobody wanted me, and I felt the strangest combination of emotions wash over me. Anger certainly. Hurt absolutely. But underneath it all there was something else. A kind of clarity. A moment of absolute, crystalline understanding about my place in this family. I was not important to them. I was not valued. I was something they'd learned to lie to easily. I was a person they could discard it without a second thought when something better came along. And I realized I'd been letting them treat me this way for years. I'd been asking for it almost by making myself so endlessly available, so endlessly willing to help, so endlessly desperate to prove my worth to them. I'd become the kind of person who could be lied to and abandoned because I'd spent so long making myself small enough to be easy to ignore. I started my car and I drove. Not toward my house. Toward Thomas's house. Thomas and Carla lived in a modest 3-bedroom ranch house in what was considered the less prestigious part of town. They had a decent neighborhood, friendly neighbors, a yard where their daughter Melody liked to play. The house wasn't fancy, but it was clean and it was warm, and there was always the smell of cooking coming from it. Carla was a good cook too. Not as elaborate as my cooking, but genuine and hearty and made with care. I'd only been to their house for Thanksgiving 3 times in the past 6 years. Derek and Susan had found reasons not to come. The house was too far away, they said, or one of their kids had a soccer game or homework obligations. But Thomas had kept inviting us, kept hoping we'd come, kept being disappointed when we didn't. I pulled into their driveway at 3:15 p.m. I could see through the front window that they were in the living room. Thomas was sitting on the couch with Carla, and Melody was curled up in a chair with a blanket, watching something on television. They hadn't gone anywhere. They were home, having a regular Thursday evening, completely unaware that they'd apparently been invited to a restaurant dinner that Derek had supposedly arranged for them. I sat in the car for a moment, hands shaking with rage, and then I got out. Thomas opened the door before I even knocked. His face shifted from surprise to concern in about 2 seconds. "Margaret, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Can I come in?" "Of course." He stepped aside and I walked into their warm, humble home. Carla came from the couch and gave me a hug. Melody looked up from her blanket and smiled, but didn't move. She was that age where getting up from a comfortable spot felt like a betrayal of personal comfort. "We weren't expecting you," Carla said warmly. "This is such a nice surprise. Can I get you something?" We were just about to order some takeout. "Nothing fancy, just some Chinese food, but you're welcome to." "Did Derek call you?" I interrupted. "About a restaurant reservation for tonight?" Thomas and Carla exchanged a confused glance. "Yes," Thomas said slowly. "He called last week. Said he'd arranged a special Thanksgiving dinner at the Johnsons' restaurant for all of us." It sounded really nice. But then about an hour ago, Carla got a text from Susan saying the reservation fell through. Something about a miscommunication with the restaurant. She said maybe we could do it another time. I felt the anger in my chest solidify into something hard and fixed. The reservation had fallen through. That was what Susan had told them. Not what had actually happened, which was that Derek had canceled it without telling me. "I see," I said. I sat down in their comfortable living room, surrounded by their modest furniture and their genuine warmth, and I suddenly understood exactly what I needed to do. "Margaret," Carla said carefully, "you look upset. What's going on?" "I'm fine," I said. "Actually, I'm wondering if I could impose on you tonight. Would you mind if I stayed for dinner with you all? I know it was just going to be takeout, but I'd love to be here with you. With your family. If that's okay." "Of course it's okay," Thomas said, and his face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. "It's more than okay. It's great. Right, Carla?" "Absolutely," Carla said. "We'd love to have you. Melody, go set the table for 4. Actually, make it 5 in case Grandma wants to join us." And so I stayed. We ordered Chinese food and we sat at their modest dining table and we talked and laughed, and it felt more genuine, more real, more like an actual family celebration than anything I'd done at Susan and Derek's house in years. At one point, Thomas said to me, "You know, I never told you this, but I've always hated that we don't get to see you more often. I miss you. And I know it's because you're so busy helping with Derek and Susan's stuff, but I just want you to know how much it means to us when you do come around. You have no idea." I looked at my son's face, his genuine, open, honest face, and I made a decision right there at that table, with Melody shoveling lo mein into her mouth and Carla refilling my iced tea glass. Everything was going to be different from this moment forward. It was time to reclaim my life, my time, my resources, and my dignity. It was time to stop being the person who was endlessly available for people who didn't appreciate her, and to start being the grandmother and mother that my younger son's family actually wanted. Over the next few days, I did something I should have done years ago. I got my finances in order. I looked at every place my money was going, every restaurant meal I paid for with Susan's family, every plane ticket I'd bought as gifts, every home improvement I'd funded for their house. The total was staggering. Over the past decade, I'd spent more than $100,000 on Susan and her family. Money that had come directly from my retirement accounts. Money that I'd need for my own security in my later years. I called my accountant and I called my banker. I looked at my financial situation with eyes that had finally been opened. I was still financially secure. My house was paid off, I had enough income to live comfortably, but I'd been spending down my safety net at an alarming rate. Without changing my behavior, I would have significant problems by the time I was 80. Then I did something even more important. I stopped answering Susan's texts within minutes of receiving them. When she asked me to babysit, I said I already had plans. When she asked me to cook for them, I declined. When she wanted me to come over and help with their house, I suggested she hire someone. It was hard because I was so conditioned to say yes to her, so programmed to put her needs first. But every time I wanted to say yes, I remembered that moment in my car at the Johnson's restaurant, and I said no instead. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, Susan called me. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message. Mom, I don't know what's going on, but I feel like you've been distant lately. I miss you. Can we talk? The message was performative in its hurt, as though she couldn't imagine why I might be upset. I did finally call her back about a week later. Hi, Susan, I said calmly. Mom. Finally. I've been trying to reach you. Is everything okay? Are you okay? I'm fine, I said. I'm calling about the Thanksgiving situation. There was a long pause. What do you mean, the Thanksgiving situation? I mean the fact that you told me we were going to a restaurant and then canceled the reservation without telling me, I said. I mean showing up at the restaurant, expecting to see my family, and instead finding out I'd been lied to. Oh, Susan said quietly. I knew you'd be upset about that. Then why did you do it? I asked. Susan took a long time to answer. Derek really wanted to do something special for the kids, she finally said. He'd found out about these concert tickets and they were last minute, and he thought it would be more fun than sitting around a dinner table. He said we could do Thanksgiving another time. But you already told me about the restaurant, I pointed out. You came to my house and told me the plan. You asked me to bring food. And then you lied to me and went to a concert instead. Susan, do you understand why that would hurt me? Of course I understand, Susan said, and she sounded irritated now, as though I was the one being unreasonable. I'm sorry you felt hurt, but Derek and I made a decision as a family. We didn't think it was that big of a deal. Well, it was, I said. But that's not actually why I'm calling. I'm calling because I've been thinking about our relationship, and I think we need to make some changes. Changes? She asked warily. I've spent 10 years helping you, I said. I've given you tens of thousands of dollars. I've sacrificed my time, my energy, my financial security. And I've done it all because I thought that's what you needed from me. But I'm realizing that's not actually helping anyone. It's not helping you become more independent, and it's absolutely not helping me. What are you saying? Susan asked, and now I could hear a note of real concern in her voice. I'm saying that going forward, I'm going to be available to you in different ways. I'm not going to lend you money. I'm not going to do your housework or babysit on demand or cook for your family every week. I'm going to be your mother, but I'm going to be a different kind of mother. A healthier kind of mother. One who has boundaries. I could almost hear Susan's brain trying to process this. But Mom, what about Emma and Jordan? They love spending time with you. They're going to be confused if you're not around as much. Then they'll come to my house, I said. And I'll spend time with them there. On my terms. In my space. But I'm done running myself ragged for your family's benefits, Susan. I'm done treating myself like I'm less important than your convenience. This is because of the Thanksgiving thing, isn't it? Susan said, and suddenly she sounded angry. I mean, come on, Mom. Derek was trying to do something nice for our family. You're acting like he personally victimized you. He did, I said flatly. By lying to you about canceling a reservation and then having you lie to me about where you were going. But more importantly, this isn't about one Thanksgiving. This is about a decade of patterns. This is about me losing myself trying to be everything to everyone. This is about me realizing that my generosity has not been met with appreciation or respect. I don't know what to say, Susan said. You don't have to say anything, I replied. I'm just letting you know how things are going to be from now on. I hung up after that. And I waited to hear from her, but she didn't call back. Derek didn't call. I think they were expecting me to come around to apologize, to realize I was being unreasonable and to fall back into my old patterns. But I didn't. Instead, I threw myself into my relationship with Thomas and his family. I started having them over to my house every Sunday for dinner. I babysat Melody more regularly, and I actually got to know my granddaughter in a way I never had before. She was funny and smart and creative, and she loved spending time with me. Carla and I became close, actually close, not just the obligatory politeness of being related through marriage. 3 months after Thanksgiving, Derek and Susan came by my house. It was a Sunday, which was when Thomas's family was there. I'd deliberately chosen to have Thomas and his family over at the same time. I knew Susan and Derek would be stopping by. I wanted to illustrate a point. When they arrived, Derek was carrying flowers, my favorite orchids, and Susan was carrying a wine bottle that I knew was expensive. They walked in to find me in my kitchen, with Melody's hands covered in flour as she helped me make cookies. Thomas was in the living room with his laptop open, looking at something. Carla was setting the table. Oh, I didn't know you had company, Susan said, and I could see her calculating the social dynamics in real time, trying to figure out what was happening. My family is here, I said simply. I turned back to the cookies. Did you want to help? We're making chocolate chip. Thomas is over there if you want to go say hi to him. I know you haven't seen him in a while. Susan and Derek exchanged a glance. They stayed for about 20 minutes, making awkward small talk before they left. Derek's flowers ended up on my kitchen table, and the wine bottle went into my pantry. That night, after Thomas's family had left and I was cleaning up the kitchen, I thought about what I'd done. I'd deliberately chosen to spend time with the family that valued me over the family that took me for granted. I'd made a statement simply by being present for people who appreciated my presence. And for the first time in years I felt at peace. But this is where the story takes an interesting turn. Because Susan didn't just let things go. I was underestimating my daughter's capacity for manipulation, and her deep-seated need to control situations. Over the next 6 months, Susan made several attempts to reconcile with me. She'd call and act like nothing had happened, suggesting we have lunch, or asking if I could watch Emma and Jordan for a weekend. Each time I'd politely decline. Each time her tone would become progressively more frustrated. Then, in the spring, something happened that revealed just how deep the betrayal went. I got a call from my bank. They were asking about some suspicious activity on my credit report. Apparently, someone had opened a credit card in my name without my knowledge. The card had been opened 4 months ago, right around the time I stopped giving Susan and Derek financial help. The card showed charges of about $5,000, all at high-end stores and restaurants. None of it was being paid, and the account had gone into default. I was shocked. I immediately reported it as fraud and the bank launched an investigation. But something inside me suspected what I was about to discover. The investigation revealed that the credit card application had been filled out online using my social security number, my address, and my date of birth. But the email address associated with the account was not mine. It was an email address I didn't recognize. I went down to the bank in person to discuss this. The fraud department manager showed me the details, and as we traced through the information, I asked her to check one more thing. I asked her to see if this same email address had been used to open any other accounts. It hadn't. But the address itself was a clue. It was a Gmail account with a very distinctive name that combined elements from both Susan's name and Derek's name. I felt something break inside me. My own daughter had committed identity theft against me. She'd been so angry about my boundary setting, so resentful of my refusal to continue funding her lifestyle, that she'd decided to steal from me instead. I handled it carefully. I reported it as fraud with the bank, and they canceled the card and removed the fraudulent account from my credit report. But I didn't immediately confront Susan about it. I needed to think about what I was going to do. I called my lawyer, something I should have done years ago in several different contexts, but that's a separate story. I consulted with him about my options. He laid out my choices. I could press charges against Susan for identity theft and credit fraud. I could pursue civil action to recover the money. Or I could handle it privately and just protect myself legally going forward. What do you want to do? My lawyer asked. I thought about it for a long time. Pressing charges against my own daughter felt extreme. But letting her get away with it felt like I'd be teaching her that she could walk all over me. That there were no consequences to her actions, that I was someone she could manipulate and victimize. I want to talk to her first, I decided. But I want to be protected. I want documentation. I want her to understand that this has consequences. 2 weeks later, I called Susan and I asked her to come to my house. I didn't tell her why. When she arrived, my lawyer was sitting in my living room. I watched the color drain from her face when she realized what was happening. Your mother has discovered that you used her identity to open a credit card account without her knowledge or permission, my lawyer said calmly. She has the evidence, she has the fraud report from the bank, and she has consulted with me about her legal options. Now, I'm here to give her professional advice about how to proceed. But she wanted to talk to you first. Susan started crying immediately. I can explain, she said. I needed some money, and my credit was already maxed out because of Derek's business problems, and I thought I'd just use Mom's credit because she's so good with money and I knew she could handle the payments. You knew you couldn't handle the payments, I said coldly. You just didn't care about the consequences to me. You knew I would be the one left dealing with this fraud, with the credit damage, with the legal issues. Mom, I'm so sorry, Susan said, and she continued crying. I don't know what I was thinking. I was so angry at you for cutting us off and I did something stupid. Yes, you did, I said. Stupid and illegal. Susan, I have tried my entire life to be a good mother. I've sacrificed for you, I've supported you, I've made myself available to you in every possible way. And you've repaid that by stealing from me. I know, Susan sobbed. I know. I'm so sorry. Please don't press charges. Please. I'm begging you. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd given birth to, this woman I'd spent years trying to please, and I made a decision. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to pay back every penny of that fraudulent debt. Not to me directly, but to the collection agency. My lawyer will give you the information. You're going to do that within 6 months, or I will press charges. You're going to get credit counseling to figure out how to manage your finances. And you're going to understand that our relationship has fundamentally changed. Changed how? Susan asked. I will always be your mother, I said. But I'm not going to be your financial safety net anymore. I'm not going to be your emotional support system. I'm not going to sacrifice myself for you. If you want a relationship with me, you're going to have to learn to value me as a person, not as a resource you can exploit. Susan paid back the debt within 4 months. She got the credit counseling. She and Derek started seeing a therapist to work through their financial problems and their entitlement issues. Over time, a new relationship emerged between us. Not the codependent mess we'd had before, but something healthier and more sustainable. Derek apologized to me, which was significant. He admitted that he'd let their financial troubles turn him into a person he wasn't proud of, and that he'd encouraged Susan to be creative with her finances. Hearing him say that, hearing him take responsibility, actually meant more to me than Susan's apologies did. Emma and Jordan seemed confused at first by my reduced presence in their lives. But over time they started coming to my house more often, specifically to spend time with me, rather than because I was automatically there doing housework or driving them around. Our relationships actually deepened because they weren't built on me serving them. And Thomas and Melody and Carla, they became the center of my world. Not because I didn't love Emma and Jordan, but because they had shown me that they valued me in a way Susan and Derek never had. Carla told me once, about a year after all of this started, I think Susan and Derek are finally starting to understand what we always knew, that you're an amazing person and a gift in our lives. They were just so busy taking advantage of you that they never realized you could just leave. You could just decide you were done. And that's the thing that nobody talks about when they talk about elderly parents and their relationships with their adult children. We think our children need us forever, so we make ourselves endlessly available. But the truth is that at some point, your adult children need to learn that they can't take you for granted, that you have value that extends beyond your usefulness to them, that you have your own life to live. I'm now 75 years old. I'm healthier than I've been in years because I'm not running myself ragged for people who don't appreciate it. My finances are stable because I stopped funding everyone else's lifestyle. My relationships with my family are actually stronger because they're built on genuine connection rather than obligation and resentment. That blue Cadillac with the keys in my pocket? It's still running beautifully, and I still drive it wherever I want to go whenever I want to go there. The difference is now I'm choosing my destinations carefully, and I'm choosing them based on where I feel genuinely wanted and appreciated. If you've experienced something similar with your own family, if you've had to reclaim your life from people who were taking it for granted, I want you to know that you're not alone, and that it's never too late to set boundaries. You deserve to be valued. You deserve to have your life mean something beyond what you can give to other people. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say no. It's the most empowering word in the English language, especially when you've spent years saying yes to everything. So the next time someone tries to tell you that you should just wait in the car while they go enjoy themselves, remember that the keys are in your pocket. The power is in your hands. You always have a choice.